There is intense pressure on the city of Sanford, Florida, to suspend or fire the police chief for his department's handling of Trayvon Martin's death. That unarmed teen, of course, who was killed, and the man who shot him is still at large. Or rather, still not been arrested. Last night, the Sanford City Commission passed a vote of no confidence in Police Chief Bill Lee. One member of the commission went even further.
Because of the situation being so poorly handled, and because there's a no confidence level in our police chief here locally and statewide, nationally, and even internationally, I would ask the chief to step down.
Norton Bonaparte Jr. is the city manager of Sanford, Florida. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, there have been some reports, unconfirmed by NBC News, that there is, in fact, a decision for the police chief to step down or to be suspended. Can you clarify that? Has anything changed on this?
No, nothing has changed at this point.
At this point, is something about to change? Are you considering a suspension or a firing or a temporary leave or some other change of status for the police chief?
I think it's fair to say that yesterday the City Commission took a vote, as you pointed out. That's something I take very seriously. On the same token, as I've stated repeatedly, that we need to have information. I've asked for an investigation. Mayor Triplett, Corrine Brown, our Congresswoman, has asked for an investigation into both the shooting of Trayvon Martin as well as the handling of the matter by the Sanford Police Department. I'd like to have that information before making any decisions.
But as I understand it, that would require impaneling a grand jury. That might not take place until April at the earliest. The question now is why the police chief is not at least being temporarily asked to take a leave of absence or himself stepping aside, even temporarily, until this is clarified.
Well, I'm not looking for the grand jury results. I've asked for an independent review of the actions of the police department, and there's some other actions that I can look at, other avenues in looking at investigating the actions. The police department acted a certain way. I want to know if there are things that they did that they shouldn't have done, or if they didn't do things that they should have done.
Is that independent review already underway, and when do you expect the answers?
One independent review has already been asked for, and I'm looking at seeing if we can expedite it to get some other agencies involved. But that has not been finalized, to answer your question.
So when would you get answers?
I'm looking to get them as soon as possible, but I also know that whomever I ask to make sure that it's credible would have to have some time to do their investigation. So at this point, as much as I would hate it, there is not a time frame.
A lot of people are asking, especially the parents of Trayvon Martin, why is George Zimmerman still not under arrest? Why has he not been brought in again for questioning? Why does he still have a gun? Can you answer those questions?
All I can say is that our hearts and sympathies go out to the members of the Martin family. Losing Trayvon is a terrible loss, and as a father and grandfather, I can't begin to imagine what they must be going through. So again, we extend to them our most heartfelt sympathy. In terms of what's happening with Mr. Zimmerman, the Sanford Police Department have turned over their investigation to the state's attorney's office. The state attorney's office looked to empower the grand jury, as you mentioned. In addition to that, the governor has asked for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to look at this matter. The mayor and the Congresswoman and myself have met with the Justice Department. We've asked the United States Justice Department to also look at this. So there are a lot of eyes on this. What we want here is justice.
Well, clearly that's what Trayvon Martin, certainly what his parents want, what the community wants. You are the city manager here. You are empowered to take immediate action. Why do all of these answers have to be forthcoming before you can at least ask the police chief to step aside? He has become a lightning rod for your community.
I'd agree that he's become a lightning rod, and I would have some conversations with him, but I also say let's not rush to judgment. I will be looking to see what the police department did, what Chief Lee did in terms of this situation.
Have you been in conversations with him about stepping down?
Chief Lee and I meet on a regular basis.
Well, with all due respect, sir, have you talked to him since the killing of Trayvon Martin about him stepping down over the way this was handled?
I think it's fair to say Chief Lee and I have had a number of conversations, some of them involving his status as the police chief of the city of Sanford.
Should he step down? Do you think he should step aside?
I think we need to look at the options. I think the fact that this is such a high kindling point, we are reviewing matters, and I look to see that something happens. I think it's important for the community to have a respect for the police department, but I also think we need to not rush to judgment. There's a lot of high tensions here, and I recognize that, and we have to be sensitive to that.
Well, there is a record there, and a lot of it preceded you, of racial incidents with the police in Sanford, Florida. At this stage, you know, if there were a shooting incident in any jurisdiction in the country, in any major city, a shooting incident involving a law enforcement officer, that officer would be put on temporary desk duty, would give up his or her weapon temporarily while the investigation is underway. Why couldn't the police chief take a temporary leave, especially given how volatile this is in the community and the pain in the community and the lack of trust in law enforcement, and be replaced temporarily while this is being investigated?
That's certainly something that could be considered.
Are you considering it?
That's something that could be considered, and I look forward to discussing various matters with Chief Lee. But again, I say that this is something that is very serious, and we are looking at various options.
And when can we expect some sort of a decision, temporary or permanent, on his status?
I'm not putting a time frame on this matter. This is too serious to rush.
All right, I'll take that as your final word. Some people would say, Mr. Bonaparte, that it is too serious to delay. But thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today.
I understand that. Thank you.
And women's groups are marking the 40th anniversary of the Equal Rights Amendment, which was passed by Congress back in 1972, but ultimately fell 3 states short of becoming part of the Constitution. This comes as advocates for women's health are pushing back against what they say is an attack on women's health care. And there's evidence that the tide might be turning. Rachel Maddow is the host of The Rachel Maddow Show on MSNBC. I want to talk to you about what you examined on your program last night and what we've been talking about here, which is all of these legislative efforts around the country. Most notably, Idaho really blew up. But let's just take a deep breath and talk about what we just heard from the city manager in Sanford, Florida, because I'm still trying to get my head around.
I wake up every morning grateful that I've never been on that and the pointy end of an Andrea Mitchell interview like that. I just want to say that it is you pressed him very hard, but this is a very difficult subject. For me, the real question right now is whether or not the police chief was acting within his discretion, or whether that law ties his hands. That stand your ground law is a radical piece of legislation. Florida did it first. Right. Something like 17 other states did it thereafter. But the fact that other states followed Florida's lead doesn't make it any more radical. That doesn't make it any less radical that Florida did it.
And you know, there is so little attention to this. I give you this right here, a personal connection because of Jim Brady and what happened to him, with having covered the Brady legislation and all of the handgun issues in this country. But I have to tell you, I did not know about that Florida law. Yeah. I follow this stuff pretty closely. Yeah. So I hold myself at fault that when there are not incidents that draw our attention to it, we don't pay attention. We're very, attention deficit disorder in the nation.
We went back last night and looked at some MSNBC coverage from 2005. MSNBC was a very different animal in 2005. But we went back and looked at some of the debate about that when that law was first passed. And it was interesting because it was seen as a very radical piece of legislation. But Florida Governor Jeb Bush had the kind of reputation then that he has now, which is as a sort of good government, reasonable, moderate, Bush family, patrician Republican. And when Governor Jeb Bush signaled that he thought this was a common sense measure, it took sort of the stain of radicalism off of it, and it validated it. And Governor Bush is back in the news today because I think he still has that reputation, and because he has endorsed Governor Romney for president. And when you look at some of the governance decisions made by people like Jeb Bush and others, their imprimatur doesn't change the radicalism what Florida then has to live under because that was passed. And that law, when it was passed, there's a number of killings that would have otherwise been prosecuted that have not been prosecuted in Florida since then. It has spread around the country, and it is a radical reconceiving of American criminal justice.
Although the sponsor of that law, the legislator who first conceived it, says that it should not apply in this case. It should not be an excuse for George Zimmerman not to be held to account for what happened.
A lot of the legislators who originally supported it, including the sponsor now casting that doubt on it, are saying, I guess we didn't think it would be used this way. A lot of people who were critics of it at the time, who were totally overwhelmed, it was an overwhelming vote in favor of it, said this will be used for racially motivated killings. This will be used for the kinds of bias-motivated, suspicion-based incidents that right now are prosecutable, and those will let people off scot-free. It was predicted at the time by the opponents of that legislation what would happen, and it's played out just like they said it would.
Tragically.
Yeah.